Let's turn to Kate Rooney for why Amazon would want to buy TikTok. Kate, and I guess why not?
Yeah, why not? Exactly. Well, Amazon did decline to comment on these reports that it's trying to get in on this TikTok deal at the 11th hour. But you saw shares pop on this news, and investors see a possible deal here as strategic. It does make sense for a couple of reasons. So Amazon has been trying to crack social shopping for years. It had this TikTok competitor within the Amazon app. It was called Inspire. It shut that down in February. And then you've got influencers right now on TikTok that often direct followers to go and buy some of their products that they're advertising on Amazon. It is a core way that younger shoppers, Gen Z especially, tends to search for things to buy. And TikTok has the reach. It's got about 1.5 billion global users. So that theoretically could integrate directly with Amazon's logistics and products listing. Could also be a boon for Amazon's growing advertising business, rather. It has been a huge part of the bull case for the stock. $17 billion business for Amazon. A TikTok deal could help expand Amazon's share of the digital ad market. And then there's possible video overlap here through Amazon Prime and some of the content side that Amazon's been moving to. Investors may also view this as defensive. You've had reports that Microsoft, Walmart were getting in and reportedly bidding for TikTok, keeping it out of the hands of any sort of major U.S. competitor, whether that's Meta or Oracle, would be a strategic move for Amazon on both the cloud side of the business, ads, as I mentioned, retail as well. And then finally, Amazon, Kelly, does appear to be eager to do any sort of mega deal. So CEO Andy Jassy has been pretty vocal about his disappointment. If you remember the iRobot deal falling through, he invoked geopolitics in some of his public remarks and what he said on CNBC before, bringing up Chinese competition. But of course, there are still major regulatory considerations if Amazon does really get a look at this. Kel.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, we have David Faber on standby with potentially some breaking news. Kate, stay right there. And David, welcome. What can you tell us?
Well, yeah, you know, we reported on this earlier when I was talking about Amazon as well. Interesting, obviously, to hear Kate's commentary around that, that there was another potential strategic in the mix. And it's really no surprise. This is obviously a sought-after asset if, in fact, there is a deal to be done for another strategic taking control. There's the name. They put it up before I even said it. AppLovin is another name that you can add. They are in negotiations, is my understanding, according to people familiar with the situation, with the Trump administration. At the very least, the Trump administration fully aware of their interest in also being a potential acquirer of TikTok. Which they would then use their technology to help monetize much of the content on there. Now, unlike an Amazon, or just to say a Meta or a Microsoft, or an Oracle, of course, which is part of an existing group that is conceivably bidding on the asset, they would not have the ability to obviously host the servers. So most likely they would include in some way the hosting deal that is already in place with Oracle. Remember Project Texas from way back when ByteDance, which controls TikTok, obviously moved much of the servers to Texas to try to deal with the opposition of the first Trump administration. I'm getting off track here, Kelly, which is all to say that, again, there are any number of potential bidders who would love to have a crack at this thing. But what remains completely unclear, at least as far as my reporting is concerned at this point, is what we end up with and whether, in fact, any of them really have an opportunity to truly have a seat at the table to try to actually buy or take control of the non-Chinese based or the outside the China TikTok, namely U.S., but also potentially Europe's been thrown in the mix. None of this, by the way, we should point out, involves actually the Chinese allowing the algorithm to go with it. You'd have to recreate the algorithm over some period of time, and obviously, at least to those who passed the bill saying that TikTok should be banned, meet their concerns that there would be no Chinese control and no ability of the Chinese to continue in any way, even though they say they haven't been, to perhaps monitor or be aware of much of what goes on the platform. So yeah, there you have it, Kelly. One more name to consider.
And AppLovin is a $100 billion market cap, even after this rally. So what are they saying TikTok would go for at this point in the U.S.?
You know, that's a number that I can't. I mean, we can work backwards from any different kinds of numbers, but it's very difficult to know whether the more than $2 billion in operating income that I'd heard, well, you know, one point along the way, the investment associated with it, what it means if you can't get the algorithm and have to recreate it.
Right.
So I'm not even going to throw a number out there, in part because in this latest round of reporting, really, Kelly, I haven't heard one.
So
frankly.
it's the point about the algorithm is so important because I wish Meta could come up with an algorithm as good as TikTok's. They look at OpenAI, they're melting servers and they've got 500 million weekly users. And so how is this algorithm so good that only the Chinese can come up with it?
It's a great question. And it was a sign, wasn't it, earlier on of their ability to actually be creative, so to speak. Obviously, DeepSeek is a much more recent example of that. But yeah, TikTok was an important advance in some ways. Some would say, obviously, a very deleterious one for the consciousness of our youth. But nonetheless, it does point to being inventive, obviously. And you're right. But you need to, I'm looking back in notes here, and this goes back, as you might imagine, years now. You're talking about rewriting, what was some of the conversations, 40 million lines of code in Mandarin.
Wow.
Now, obviously, this is more recent. Like LLMs might make that easier or might make it more possible to move more quickly. But that source code, that's a lot. It doesn't appear that that is what we're talking about now. What we're talking about now is either diluting down the ownership of ByteDance to a point where it is no longer deemed to have any level of control, and obviously having the U.S. property, so to speak, in the hands of U.S. investors and a company.